feel like this little kid. By the way, I know it's a very small class. I have the microphone so that you'll be kept awake. So I can be loud. No, just kidding. Anyway, the passage we are focusing on is the one from 1 John chapter 2. In verses 15 through 16, begin with, it says, "Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." So we see from this passage that John basically says there are three lures that Satan uses to try to get us to be more like the world, to be more in the world. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and pride. These have worked since the beginning. If you remember back in Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 6, what did the fruit look like when Eve was looking at it? It looked good. It looked like it was going to make somebody wise. It looked good, and it looked like it was going to taste good. Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride. This has worked for the longest time. Since right after the creation of the world, these three lures have worked. And Satan keeps using them over and over again. So we're going to briefly talk about these. But you may say, well, I do not love the world to begin with. I'm a Christian. True. How often do you hear a Christian come into church and he's like, "Oh, I just love the world. Do you love the world? I love it more. I just love the world." But we hear of Christians falling away way too often. Why is that? Well, they love the world, like Demas in 2 Timothy 4. Sorry, I missed the verse there. 4:10. "For Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica." He just left Paul alone and moved on. We may not love the world openly. We may not say, "Oh, I love the world." But maybe we may admire some of it. Admire a little thing in the world, or a few things of the world. Now you may say, well, admiring is a lot different than loving. True again. Admiring is different than loving because admiring is one of the first steps that will bring you to love something. I know a young man who admired this young lady so much that he moved across the world to be with her. Or Judas. Remember Judas? He had this little vice of sometimes taking money from the bag, as John says. And that became such an addiction to him, such an admiration to him, that at some point somebody says, "Hey, 30 pieces of silver. Sure, I'll give you my friend Jesus for 30 pieces of silver." Admiration is just the first step. But eventually, if you're not careful, you will end up loving whatever you admire. So there may be a few things that we admire in the world that we are not openly loving in the world, but eventually, if we are not careful, we may end up loving. So admiration will eventually bring us to loving something or someone. And again, like Judas, once you get rid of something because you love something else, it's hard to get it back. Or maybe you'll never get it back. So we need to be careful about what we love and where we set our priorities and admirations. We may at times admire or desire the world. Maybe we admire the freedom that some of the young people our age, or your age, I should say, in the world seem to have. They seem to be able to do what they want, when they want it, without consequence. One of the ways in which this freedom is so evident in this age is sexual purity or impurity, and how that has greatly influenced society. How many people do you think, without looking at your notes, how many people do you think in this country get to marriage without having sexual relationships? A percentage. Take a guess. Less than 2? Anybody else? Less than 2 here. Less than 2, less than 2, less than 2. Anybody else? Less than 2? Souls. 10? 3 to 5. According to statistics, I've looked in a couple of articles. 3 to 5%. The average American, 1 every 20 gets to marriage without having sexual relationships. Well, one would say, yes, but we are religious. It's different for us. Well, average statistic. How many do you think of religious people get to marriage without sexual relationships? 10. Okay, that's. I hope it's a little more. Anybody else? 10. Well, it's actually a little higher. It's 20%. 20% is 1 every 5. It means that about 3 of you, statistically, will get to marriage without having sexual relationships among highly religious people. This is how bad, in a way, and how crucial this issue is become. This is why we're here teaching about it all the time, because it is urgent. It is a way that the ones that claim to have Christ's name on them, they cannot control their flesh anymore. 1 every 5 means 4 every 5 of you, statistically, on average, wouldn't be able to be pure until marriage. It's very important that we focus on not letting these lures carrying us away. Let us sanctify ourselves, like Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Verse 3. For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that is, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in lustful passions, like the Gentiles who do not know God. See, this is saying, this is something that people that do not know God are doing. Not the ones that know God. The ones that know God need to know better than this. This is Paul. This is what he's saying. And then no man transgress and defraud his brother in the matter, because the Lord is the avenger in all these things, just as we also told you before and solemnly warned you. For God has not called us for a purpose of impurity, but in sanctification. You know, I did a lesson here at Eastside just a couple months ago, and we were talking about, actually it was an invitation a couple of weeks ago, and we're talking about how you need to speak God's language in order to have a relationship with Him. And if you are here, what is God's language? Starts with an H. Holiness. You need to speak holiness in order to have a relationship with God. Because God speaks holiness. He is holy. In order to be like Him and with Him, you have to be holy like He is. Verse 8, so he who rejects this is not rejecting man, but the God who gives His Holy Spirit to you. You know, if you just don't care about your purity, then you're rejecting God. You're rejecting what God stands for. You're rejecting who God is. You don't care about your Creator. That's basically, you are walking up to God and saying, I don't care about what you've done for me. This is what you are doing. You don't do what He asks you to do. And Proverbs 5, it's a similar passage about drinking water from your own cistern. There's a context for sexual relationships, and that is called marriage. That is how it's supposed to be done. We may at times desire the world. We may desire the riches of the world. You know, you are at an age where you're in college, you're deciding about your career, you're deciding about what you're going to do for the rest of your life. You're deciding about what your job is going to be, and you're evaluating why you're going to get into a certain career. And one of the parameters that you are considering is how much this is going to pay. And now, you know, you're thinking about, I want to have a nice enough car, I want to have a big enough house, and maybe sometimes we almost try to justify our choices by saying, well, you know, I'm going to provide for my family so that they'll be comfortable. I will have enough. Well, how about we focus on time instead of money? How about we value our career choice based on how much time will I have to spend with my wife? How much time will I have to spend with my kids, raising them? How much time will I have to spend in the church? You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5, Paul says, do not deprive one another unless it is for a time and by agreement, because then you cannot control yourself. That's basically what Paul says. Let's turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 5. Stop depriving one another except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Satan is there. He's going to offer, you know, one of those lures to you, and you're going to bite on it if you're not careful enough. Raise your children. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. How are you supposed to teach your children if you never see them? How are you supposed to be an example to your children if you're never there for them? Time is a lot more important than what you're going to have in this life. And your career choice right now has a big influence on what you're going to be for the rest of your life. And how about church? Matthew chapter 9, verse 37 to 38 describes how there is a big need of workers in the vineyard. 1 Timothy 3 and the passage in Titus as well, they describe how an elder needs to be. 1 Timothy 3, verse 2. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. An elder is not some kind of special Christian. It's just who we have to aim to when we build ourselves as Christians, above reproach. How are you going to become above reproach if you don't put time in it? Like Darren was saying last night, you need to spend time with God and His Word in order to be confident you're going to be saved. Otherwise, there are also more subtle issues. We talked about purity. And, you know, you can always be impure, you can be single, you can be married, you can be dating somebody, you can always fall in the lust of the eyes or lust of the flesh. And then there are some issues that are more focused on pride, purity. You know, we remember that picture there from the beginning of this kid that is there and is wishfully looking through a window and is wishing he could be outside with all his friends. They're having so much fun out there. Well, we have reached an age when we're in college that we're maybe even away from our homes, and guess what? Nobody's looking. We can do whatever we want. And actually what we're going to do sometimes is we're going to go out and be the complete opposite of what we were brought up to be, just because we are independent and we can do whatever we want. I don't care what my parents taught me. I'm going to show them how independent I am. I'm going to do whatever I want. Well, that's foolishness. Do something because it's the complete opposite of something else without no other reason is foolishness. Remember that little guy in Luke chapter 15 goes up to his father and says, "To me, you're dead. Give me my inheritance. I'm going to live my own life. He picks up and goes as far possible, he says, to a far country, as far as possible to his upbringing, to his family, from his upbringing, so that he can be independent. He's going to show the world who he is. A few months later, or even weeks later, he's wishing he could have the food that the pigs are eating. That's how independent he was. That's his wisdom. I'm going to show the world how to feed pigs, or how to desire the food of the pigs. That's where we end up if we decide based on our independence that way. Okay, let's have a quiz now. That woke you up a little bit, right? Just kidding. Let us develop our own faith. Like Romans chapter 14. Work on our own faith. Romans chapter 14, the first part of verse 22. The faith which you have as your own conviction before God. Faith is not a feeling. I'm going to do whatever I feel like it's right. I'm going to base my beliefs on what has been written for me, like John says in chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. How about tolerance? We live in a world and society that prides itself in being tolerant and accepting. We are okay with whatever happens just because it's okay for you. It looks fine, you know. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, they're not as tolerant. I like when they say, well, I'm not judging, but, and then they go on and you know. Well, in a way, we are to judge the world because we have to live by God's standards. And not go out and point out all the mistakes that everybody's doing, but by the standard of life that we have, we're going to show the world how they're supposed to live. And, you know, for certain issues, only a small percentage of the world may be living that specific kind of sin, but the rest of the world is like, yeah, whatever, that's fine. As long as they enjoy it, as long as they are happy, as long as they do whatever they want. Well, that's what the world is like these days. And guess what? They expect you to tolerate that. Just this week, we have a new lady at work that is learning, and they were talking about religion. And most of the time when they talk about religion, I'm just listening and just not, you know, trying to intervene too much, but I just hear all sorts of things from, well, you know, what I believe makes me better, and I don't care if it's right, as long as it makes me better. If I believe in something, it better be the right thing, because if I put time and effort in it, it better be the right thing. Well, this lady was just talking about how there are so many religions, and you know, if you listen to everybody, you just get so confused. Well, I told her, read the Bible. Stop listening to men, listen to God. Because if everybody claims to be right, and they're doing opposite things from each other, then at least one has to be wrong, right? Well, supervisor comes in and says, I think religion is a deeply personal thing, whatever works for you, and we try not to talk about it at work. After talking about it for 15 minutes, after me waiting for 14 of those 15 minutes before I said something, just do whatever feels like to you, feels good to you. That will work. You get to heaven that way. I live on a dead-end street. How many ways are there you can get to my house? Not a tricky question. One. If you miss one of the turns, you're not going to get there, especially if you miss the last turn. If I'm giving you directions to come to dinner tonight, and I'm telling you which way you have to take, and then I tell you, be there at 7, well, not the singing, okay, be there at 6, And at 6:25 you call me and you say, hey, I got lost. And I'm going to ask you, have you followed directions? And you're going to say, for the most part, well, did you turn left where you're supposed to turn left? No, I felt like going straight. Well, guess what? You missed dinner, and I'm going to eat all your pasta as well. You're not going to get there if you go the way you feel like. You get there if you go the way I tell you to go. And that's what God says. You're not going to come to me the way you feel like you're going to come to me. You're going to come to me the way I tell you have to follow to come to me. So sometimes we take pride in just being tolerant and accepting of all sorts of things, and you're just, have all these people expressing one thing and the opposite of that thing, and then they just are so happy, and everybody just takes pride in their sin. Isaiah in chapter 5, about more than 2,700 years ago, wrote this. Chapter 5, verse 20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. What society is doing these days is saying sin is great. They take pride in the fact that sin is great, and the way we live, we hear that all the time, we see that all the time, we almost are bombarded by it 24/7. People who are proud to say sin is great, sin is the way to go. Well, we need to be careful how we live in this world, so that we don't get influenced by people that just say sin is great. Remember the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 5? Oh, we have this man, he is with his father's wife, and we are so modern, so up to date. We are so accepting and welcoming and tolerant. Paul comes, says, shame on you. Send him out so that hopefully he will repent. That's the two different standards that we see from the world or from God. And it is your choice where you stand, knowing that there will be consequences. Galatians chapter 6. Passage that is not on there. Galatians chapter 6. Verse 7 and 8. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. We live in a world that doesn't want to face consequences. I get a speeding ticket, I'm not going to pay. I'm going to go to a lawyer so that my speeding ticket can be removed. I get too much to debt, I cannot pay. I'm not going to pay. I'm going to find a way not to pay. We want to live without consequences. But we have to understand that no matter what, there are going to be consequences of our choices. So if you choose to love the world, that's all you're going to have. Tolerance is very much evident in issues like divorce or homosexuality. Malachi 2:16, God says, I hate divorce. No clear way that God can say how he feels towards divorce. Genesis 2, they are meant to be one flesh for the rest of their lives. Well, my previous supervisor was her third husband. And you know what? It was fine. We have issues like divorce and homosexuality all around us. Churches She used to say, well, I like that preacher because he doesn't tell me that I should not be living with his husband. That's something that is as polluted to God's people are supposed to be, and has ruined the name of Christian in the world. But we have to do better than that. We have to, first of all, not be like that, and second of all, expose error by the way we live, by creating and living according to this higher standard that we have. Homosexuality, the law of Moses. Since the law of Moses has been condemned, and even later Paul makes a note about that. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13. If there's a man who lies with a male, as those who lie with a woman, both of them have committed a detestable act, they shall surely be put to death. Oh, that's a hateful God in today's world. No, that's a God who speaks holiness, and He wants us to be holy. And when something gets in the way of holiness, it is exposed. And this has to be a lesson for everybody that lived from that point on. They're going to face consequences if you don't live in the holy way that God wants you to live. And Romans chapter 1 again condemns that behavior. What are we going to do then? We have said so far that there are these three loves that make us love the world eventually. And not like I'm going to wake up one day, I'm going to love the world. It's something that we admire in the world. How rich my neighbor seems to be. How free my classmate seems to live, really. How tolerant the society is. And they all take pride of those things because they let the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and pride get in the way. What are we going to do? Well, I'm not going to give you solutions, but maybe I'm going to help you see the problem, hopefully. Maybe we're not scared of the world enough. Maybe we just live in the world, we are happy with the way the world is, we are comfortable when we live in the world and we're with people in the world, and it doesn't bother us when bad things happen. We think we're up to date, we think we're modern, we think that those people that say that certain behaviors are wrong are just old and they should know better. Maybe we're not scared of the world enough. Maybe we're not scared of the prince of the world enough. And as John 14, verse 30, Jesus says, I will not speak much more with you, for the ruler of the world is coming, and he has nothing in me. There are two ways, like we've seen with that passage from 1 John. Either it is from God, or it is from the world. If you choose to kind of walk in between, well, guess what? You're on the world, because you're not with God. And then James chapter 1, verse 15. James 1:15. When lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Just like we said when we read that passage from Galatians 6, there are consequences to our behaviors. If you choose to be modern and accepting and tolerant and give in to your lusts, well, you're going to have a certain consequence. And James says that it's death. Maybe we do not appreciate what Christ has done for us enough. Maybe we just don't get it. You know, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, the author there just makes this long list of the things he has tried, of how he has fulfill his pleasures, his desires. He just had everything and more. And if ever there was something that nobody had, he had it. And if ever there was something that he desired to have, he had it. Well, in the end, of all the list of things that he has tried, guess what he says? Anybody? All is vanity. I consider all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I exerted, and behold, all was vanity as striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Maybe we are not focused on the right thing. Maybe we are loving the world, we are admiring the world, we are seeing things that we like in the world because we don't understand what Jesus has done for us. Oh yes, we know it. He died on the cross for us. We can, say it by memory. We heard it all our lives, but we don't understand it. We don't appreciate it. 1 John chapter 3. We don't appreciate what Jesus has done for us. It's hard to live in the way that he expects us to live. After all, we were created in the image of God, not in the image of the world. We have to be like God, not like the world. Everyone who practices sin also practices lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. You know that he appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him sins. No one who sins has seen him or knows him. This is, if you keep on sinning, if you don't change the way you live your life, you cannot claim to have known him, to be wearing his name. Little children, make sure no one deceives you, that one who practices righteousness is righteous, that just as he is righteous. The one who practices sin is of the devil. For the devil has sinned from the beginning. There are only two ways. The Son of God appeared for this purpose, to destroy the works of the devil. We don't always appreciate enough the bad that Christ, by what he has done, is able to keep us from. Yeah, we focus on the good and what we can have through him, but the consequence that we would have if he didn't come and die for us, that would be a lot worse than just being in between. No one who is born of God practices sin, because his seed abides in him, and he cannot sin because he is born of God. He cannot keep going on that lifestyle of giving into lust, giving into pride, because he has changed. That we accept it or not, that we want it or not, we are eternal beings. We're going to live forever somewhere. And if throughout this life you're going to seek the good things in the world, you're going to seek power, you're going to seek riches, you're going to seek honor, you're going to seek being modern in the way you think and accepting and tolerant, in spite of what God says, well, that's all you get. And once you die, or once the Lord comes back, that's all you have. If you even had it, you are able to achieve all your worldly goals. If you live like the way that Christ wants you to live, all the pain, all the suffering, all the persecution, all the times that you get laughed in your face, all the time that they say, we're not going to talk about religion because you are saying something that bothers my conscience. I want to just be living the way I want to live. All the time that in a way or another we are persecuted, all the time that in a way or another life is hard in this world. Once we die, or once the Lord comes back, all that is going to end. And you know the consequence of that. Colossians chapter 3. the first 4 verses. Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things on the earth, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. And then the advice that we are given in Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 20 to 27. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. I wish, he's saying, I wish that hard shell that your heart has would break, and that you would open a little gap that this word would go in there and make some changes. Do not let them depart from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart, just like Darren was saying last night. For they are life to those who find them, and health to all their body. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, who devious speech far from you. Let your eyes look directly ahead, let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. Be focused. Don't let those lures, those lusts of the flesh, of the eyes, that desire to show how good you are, that pride proposes, distract you from where you're going. I appreciate your attention. The fact that most of you didn't fall asleep. I'm just kidding. I really hope that this lesson and all the others you heard so far, and you will hear the rest of the afternoon, you will ponder and consider. And then if you ever have time, you can also read what I wrote in there. It may not reflect closely, but hopefully it's enough that you can review the lessons. And I would if I was you. And I'm going to do it myself. I want to give you some homework. What are you going to do? Once you leave here tonight, when you wake up tomorrow, if you're given tomorrow, when you go back to whatever you're doing on Monday, if you have a summer job or to school, or once you go back to life after this wonderful day that you're just spending with brothers and sisters in Christ for the most part, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep looking wishfully through that window at your friends and how fun they're having, how much fun, and then how they're enjoying life? Are you going to keep wishing you could be like them, with them? There are consequences. And we're all going to face our consequences. Thank you for your attention. And yes, I gave you 15 minutes for a nap. Only 15 minutes.